Good evening, Hall of Fame Dynasty members. It is I, your commissioner, once again, and I am here to bring you another MLB review. It's been 2 weeks since we last talked. It's been a bit busy between fixing cars and dealing with my mom's estate and stuff like that. You guys know everything that's gone on, but this past weekend was actually one that wasn't filled with having to work on my car and do a brake change or anything else. So I had some extra time. Missed last week, unfortunately. There's a lot going on, but we are back in business, boys. It's been an interesting couple of weeks. Like I talked about earlier this week in the Slack channel, we might be missing Sean. I haven't heard from him in a while. I've tried texting him. Vic has tried texting him. And at this point, I will be running his team. I will be setting his lineups. I will not make any moves. If we decide we need to make a move, if there's his team gets severely hurt or something else, we can always do that as a league if need be. But for the most part, any pickups or drops would basically be done by ranking or the score that is on the site. So it really wouldn't be by much. On top of that, that's about it for news right now. Do not forget that we are 2 days away from the NFL roster cuts. Those have to be done by May 15th by midnight, going on to the 16th, just to be clear. So, let's say 10 o'clock Central Time on May 15th, they need to be done by. I will check them on the 16th. If they are not up to date, I will be making the moves from there just to make it easier. That way everybody gets it in. But obviously we wouldn't be, no one that is a big name would be cut unless it, no Le'Veon Bells, no Larry Fitzgerald. It would usually be the younger players unless specified. But you guys have time, 2 more days. If you have a trade agreement, then, and say it wouldn't be completed until the 16th, that's fine. We'll deal with it then, as long as it would put your roster where it needs to be. So with that being said, I've got some lemon shandy tonight before the show. So let's get into the show for this week. I'm excited. It's been a fun couple of weeks. It's been busy. There's been a lot of activity. And I'm going to start the show off also by saying, God damn you, Kevin, for stealing Corbin Martin. Made his debut yesterday, looked pretty good. And of course, I lost. I tried bidding on him, but Kevin bid $100, so beat me. I don't know who else had gone after him, if anyone, but good pickup by Kevin there on somebody that had made their debut. Looks to be a pretty promising prospect. And Kevin, of course, it's his Astros, so he was able to get it with the money that he spent. So that being said, let's do a quick, brief overview of what happened in week 5. Won't spend much time on it. I did figure it needed to be talked about, and now it kind of bugs me because I see that the third one in line is not in line with the rest, and it's one of those little triggers. That being said, let's move on to week 5 once this actually pops up. There we go. So we had the Twins versus the Yankees in week 5. The Twins came out on top 8-4. Same with the Blue Jays taking on the Cardinals. The Cardinals have been very up and down this year, but they lost to the Toronto Blue Jays. Battle of the Birds goes to Toronto, round 1. Then we had the Colorado Rockies just absolutely stomp and spank and smack and destroy the Miami Marlins in week 5, 11 categories to 1. In our 4th matchup, we had the Houston Astros play a pretty good game against the Braves, one of the better teams in the league. They held their own, and even though they didn't come out top, they should have been holding their head high because of what they had done. And then in the last game of week 5, the LA Dodgers played a pretty good week. And even though they got off to a cold start, they were able to play very well over the end of that week to give them a respectable line. Only 3 wins on the week, but better than the 10 or 11 losses they may have accumulated had they stayed cold like they were earlier in that week. So that's week 5. Not too much to talk about there. This week in baseball, we kind of already discussed this first one. CC Sabathia becomes the 17th pitcher to ever reach 3,000 strikeouts. However, he's only the 3rd lefty to ever do it. And that's the amazing part. Will he be the last of his kind? I don't know, because a lot of great pitchers are righties at this point. And many of the left-handers that do exist in this game are more about deception and ground balls and placing it where it is. You don't see many left-handers throwing 97, 98, or 96 like right-handers do. And even if you do, we don't see the longevity of pitchers that we used to as well. So that's a tough thing to really do. It's a really, CC Sabathia, to stick around as long as he has, the amount of innings he's had on his arm, which actually I'm curious to see how many innings he's thrown in his career. Now that I bring it up, let me find my keyboard. And at this point, he will be he has rejoined the New York Yankees from what I last remember. But he had such a run with the Milwaukee Brewers back in the day, even with the Yankees when he first got there. And for reference, in his career, CC Sabathia has thrown 3,500 innings. That itself is a testament to how great he is. He's a 6-time All-Star, 2009 World Series, Cy Young, of course, he's earned one of those in his career, but just what a career CC Sabathia had. Even though it didn't get off to the best start with a lot of years over a 4 ERA, he's been one of the better pitchers, and he's pitched 19 years in the league. So enough about him. I'm kind of curious of a discussion. We already had it, but I don't know if we'll see many lefties just because we don't see pitchers going 8-9 innings like these guys used to. The Marlins finished Sunday with a 10-29 record, not the fantasy Marlins, but the real life Marlins. 10 wins on the season, and we are in May 13th. Their current pace doesn't look great. If you were to extrapolate that out, see, it's 39 games, so by 156, currently they're on pace for about 42 wins. It's very possible that they break the 2003 Tigers record of 43 wins and 119 losses. They are going to be right there with it, and they are also on pace for the least amount of, or at least the biggest run differential ever to be in the negatives. It's very possible it happens. I don't know, but this Marlins team is just bad, and we knew that. And then something I actually remember, on this day in 2015, Corey Kluber struck out 18 batters without issuing a walk. He joins Luis Tiant, Roger Clemens, Randy Johnson, and Kerry Wood. Wow. So I can say Tiant, but not Wood. I don't know how I fucked that up. All right. But Kerry Wood as the only other people to reach this feat. The fact that he was able to strike out 18 and not issue a walk whatsoever shows he was on, he was deadly, he was filling up that strike zone with pitches and just kicking ass that day. So it's only ever been done by 5 people, and I don't think it's happened since that I can remember. We've seen 12, 13 strikeouts, but usually there is a walk in there. Moving on, we are looking at the individual leaders, and I did originally have this slide done for last week. So this is updated, who's new, who's not. So obviously runs has belonged to Bellinger all year. 6th fantasy week straight that he has led it overall. Although players are finally catching up to him, he's only ahead by 1 or 2 runs at this point compared to what he was earlier in the year. Obviously, he had a kind of a slow week this last week. He pitched very well, but just didn't get the job. Just the Dodgers offense has kind of slowed down by themselves. So obviously that affects Bellinger. You've got Christian Yelich for the 4th week straight, leading the league in home runs at 16. Bellinger still leads RBIs, once again losing ground overall, but getting the job done. When it comes to stolen bases, we have a new leader in the league with Adalberto Mondesi at 13. He's actually surpassed my expectations at this point. I didn't expect him to play as well as he had. Not the same kind of level that he had last year, as he finished 2018 with 14 home runs and 32 stolen bases. He's on a good pace. hitting 270. He's right about where he was last year. And if he keeps it up, he's going to be a very valuable asset for somebody that was a free agent pickup last year. So great job by Colorado Rockies and their scouting department, looking great. And then batting average and Cody Bellinger. I cannot talk. Batting average and OPS for Cody Bellinger, 407 and 1.258 for those two categories, leading the league once again, 4th and 5th week straight, respectively, in both of those categories. Now, when it comes to pitching, we've got something new actually here. So Zach Greinke last week led the league in quality starts at 6 by himself. He's now at 8, and it would be the 2nd week straight, updating for last week. And then something that to me is just absolutely astonishing, regardless if you own him or not, if you watch any Dodgers games or not, Hyun-Jin Ryu has 3 walks allowed in 52.1 innings pitched on the season. That is absolutely bonkers. Just the fact that he has been this good to this point, the fact that he has been this effective and not allowing walks whatsoever. It's basically every 3 starts he's allowing 1 walk at this point, essentially. Now, he had 2 great games in a row. He's been an excellent player and the Dodgers have kind of needed it for as many holes as they've had in that rotation early on. Garrett Cole, once again, leads the league in strikeouts. He has been fantastic this year, allowing a few more runs than last year, not as effective that way, but the strikeouts are still there. He is racking them up one after another, and that belongs to the Colorado Rockies once again. And so we have a surprising leader in ERA with Zach Davies at 1.54, just over the qualifying mark of 45 innings. And this one was very close with Chris Paddock. I really thought it would belong to him, but Zach Davies somehow has it. And I think he's obviously not a 1.5 ERA pitcher, but enjoy it while it lasts. Chris Barnes, good pickup, obviously is helping in the early going. He's going to regress at some point. I don't believe he will stick there all season, nor should anyone believe it for almost any pitcher because these hitters are so good nowadays. And then obviously whip belongs to Hyun-Jin Ryu. Great whip, not allowing the walks, keeps that low, isn't allowing many hits. So he's doing a great job so far with limiting not only runs, but base runners as well. And then saves and holds belongs to Kirby Yates for the 5th week straight. He has shared it at times with Shane Green, surprisingly for the Detroit Tigers. But Kirby Yates has been an excellent asset for the Colorado Rockies that they traded for earlier this year. Had a lot more saves and holds than I thought he would have at this point going into it. But the Padres, or as you may have seen yesterday, the Madres are absolutely not dominating, but they are playing very well for a very young team. I think they're going to be comparable to the Philadelphia Phillies from last year where, okay, they're at the top almost the whole year. And then you kind of get to the end of the year and you lose some of that steam. You lose the ability to really turn it on when you need to. And because of the fact that they are a very young team with Luis Urias and Fernando Tatis Jr., and you've got some decently young outfielders, and you have your biggest veteran is probably Machado or Hosmer, and obviously Machado not performing up to what we would expect him to at this point from what I last looked at. Let's see if I can find him for the season. Machado is only hitting .252 with 22 runs, 21 RBIs, and is 8 home runs on the season. I mean, not bad so far in the early goings, but the average isn't where I expected it to be. The power is getting there for the most part. Only 4 doubles on the season, surprisingly. But well below his career marks for the most part. That being said, the Padres are a good team, and Kirby Yates has been a very valuable asset, even at his age. Great pickup by the Colorado Rockies this past offseason. Moving on to the injured reserve, we surprisingly didn't have as much news these last 2 weeks, so at least going into this week. Here's what we have. The biggest ones that really happened were Corey Kluber with the fractured forearm. Chicago White for the Atlanta Braves. For the Chicago White Sox, Juan Soto's been reinstated. They did lose Tyler Glass now to a forearm strain. Luckily, it doesn't look like Tommy John at this point. It's just a forearm strain. Should be back in 4 to 6 weeks. Colorado Rockies kind of took a big hit name-wise with Jose Altuve hitting the IR due to a hamstring issue. Shouldn't be more than 10 days from what I'm seeing. Really nothing too crazy to worry about, but just an unfortunate situation with, obviously, Jose Altuve's had a pretty good season up until this point with 9 home runs on the season, only 1 stolen base, not as much power as you'd like overall with OPS, but I think once he racks up that batting average, he'll look even better. And then Buster Posey has taken batting practice recently after dealing with a concussion. So he may be coming back soon. We don't know just yet. Moving on to the Miami Marlins, the biggest news for injuries for them is Miguel Sano with the heel injury. He did confirm that he is going to AAA. We may see him within the next couple weeks possibly, which would be a good boost for the Miami Marlins offense, and especially with even though Miguel Sano hasn't lived up to expectations up until this point, the Miami Marlins could definitely use some help at third base with Heimer Candelario hitting just above the Mendoza line. Now, the New York Yankees have been the most active one when it comes to injuries this year, unfortunately. Miguel Andujar was placed back on IR earlier today for the New York Yankees, both fantasy and real life. They said they are going to call somebody up as soon as possible. They were able to actually reinstate Aaron Hicks today off of IR, so kind of like a swap there. Unfortunately, Andujar has been placed back on the IR. Who knows what is happening with that shoulder, but it has definitely got to be barking if he is already sitting at that point right now. Felix Hernandez did get tossed onto the 10-day IR as well with a shoulder injury, and then this news just came down earlier today. Really unfortunate for a guy that I've always rooted for. Obviously, being a Chicago White Sox fan, I also love guys with nasty sliders, such as the one that belongs to Carlos Rodon. Absolutely nasty, similar to Chris Sale. But he will undergo Tommy John surgery on Wednesday. Real unfortunate news, and I'm actually really happy I didn't chase after Carlos Rodon as hard as I really thought I could have, because I was talking with Vic all off season, wanted to get Carlos Rodon. I was very iffy on whether or not he would perform well this year, and up until this point, he'd been pretty decent, kind of up and down. But I was worried about the walks from last year, and it's unfortunate for a guy like him. 5 ERA at this point, a whip over 1.4, but the strikeouts were there back up from last year. Walks were still kind of a tick up at that point, almost 5 walks per 9. Gotta stop burping. But he will undergo Tommy John surgery. We likely will not see him until almost the beginning of the 2021 season, and may likely be a free agent at that point. Has he pitched his last game for the Chicago White Sox? It's highly possible. And it's unfortunate for a guy with such talent to have to deal with that. And the last team on our list is the Toronto Blue Jays. Ryan Braun is day-to-day with a hamstring injury. And then A.J. Pollock will be out 6 more weeks due to an infection. He did have a pick line put into his elbow, I don't know if it specifically went into his elbow, but he did have a pick line in his body to help eradicate an infection, and that will sideline him for 6 more weeks. That was as of May 6th, so we are down to 5. It's going to be a while until we see him, and it's unfortunate. I mean, A.J. Pollock is a very great player if he's able to stay healthy, but that has always been his issue, is the ability to stay healthy. That's what we've got for injuries. Let's move on to fire and ice. And this actually worked out very well for us not doing a review last week. So for fire, we've got a bunch, 2, of course. The first 2 players we'll talk about, both Houston Astros. Kevin should be happy with this. Number 1 coming in is George Springer, of course. If you haven't seen what he's done this last few weeks, 16 runs, 7 home runs, 15 RBIs, and a stolen base with a 447 average out of George Springer. Absolutely tore it up these last few days, especially if I can pull up his player card, since I do not remember who he belongs to, and that would, of course, be the Rockies. The Rockies are his owner. Overall, hitting .315 on the season with an OPS over 1. And over the last couple of days, he has torn it up. On Sunday, on Mother's Day, he had 2 home runs. Before that, on May 9th with a home run, May 8th, May 6th. He has just been all types of fire, absolutely just tearing the cover off the ball for the Houston Astros. As you can see, scoring more than 1 run and 1 RBI per day. And going along with that is Alex Bregman. Not as many runs, but more RBIs, an even higher OPS, and 8 home runs in the past 14 days. 2 of them coming yesterday on Mother's Day as well. That whole Houston Astros team has been deadly. So don't try and throw them any fastballs because they will absolutely just crush it. Now, these were 2 surprising names. Obviously, Hyunjin Ryu is a name we already talked about. 25 innings pitched, 1 walk in that time, 21 strikeouts, and a .36 ERA with a whip very similar to his ERA. And then the other name that's on the list is starting pitcher Lucas Giolito, one that I had lost faith in for sure in terms of just being even a 3 as a major league pitcher. But so far this year, he's been pretty fantastic. I mean, he's been up and down. He's had his issues, but over the last 14 days, an ERA under 2, a whip close to 1.0, and almost just over 9K per 9. And I mean, he's doing excellent on the season. A 3.55 ERA. Can he keep it up for the year? Who knows? But all of his peripherals really show that he's right in line where he should be in terms of ERA. Even if you look at his Sierra, it's a 3.83. So his ERA is not far off overall from his 3.55 mark at this point on the season. But the fact that he's been able to step up in the loss of Carlos Rodon and show what kind of guy he can be, it's showing in these past 14 days. As for the ice side, these guys are absolutely bone-chillingly cold. And first, we'll start with Tim Beckham, who, even though he was part of the fire to start the season, excellent play, lots of power to open it up in Japan. He has absolutely cooled down over the past 14 days with only 1 home run, 1 RBI, and an average well below 200 at this point. OPS under 500. And unfortunately, there is a very similar player also on this list in Travis Shaw, who the only counting stats he's had in the past 14 days is 2 runs with an average close to 100 and an OPS below 400. That is absolutely trash, absolutely terrible. And it's hard to see a guy like him or even Mike Moustakas struggle for the Milwaukee Brewers. You kind of have to wonder, when will Keston Hiura get his chance, because of the fact that the Brewers did invest money into Mike Moustakas and Travis Shaw to try and keep them around and keep this offense going. But when you have Keston Hiura with 11 home runs and 3 stolen bases and a 3.33 average down in AAA, part of it is fueled by BABIP luck, but he's got an on base to go with it. You have to wonder, when will he get his shot for the Brewers at second base, because the Brewers could use some more offense and definitely a more consistent glove at second base compared to what Shaw and Moustakas have been providing. Now, onto the pitching side of it, a name that was unfortunate to make this list is starting pitcher German Marquez, with 18 innings pitched over the past 14 days and an ERA over 5. He's really not walking many people, but he's just getting hit around the ballpark the last few weeks. Unfortunate for him, but I think he'll bring it back down to earth when he comes down to it. I mean, we saw what he did last year in the second half. A lot of it is early season, trying to get into the rhythm, trying to lock it back in. But he's still got an ERA under 3.5, more than 9 Ks per 9. So still doing very, very well there, and limiting the walks for sure have been great for him. And then the last one to make this list is Aaron Sanchez, who has been all over the map this year. Miami Marlins acquired him this offseason Hasn't been bad overall, but there are still some times when he loses control. Pulling up his stats for the season here, still an ERA under 4, close to 9 Ks per 9 for him, but he is just getting absolutely hit everywhere. 7 walks, 19 strikeouts these past 14 days, and as you can see, that whip is nearing 2.0. Not that far off, and most of it's just been from the hits. So if he can lock it down and kind of get it under control again, that would be great for him. As for call-ups and send-downs recently, there have been a few that have been have made their debuts in the show. They have jumped on the road to the show, as we say. Most of them being starting pitchers, of course. Guys like starting pitcher Griffin Canning, Cal Quantrill, and Corbin Martin all made their debuts. And so Griffin Canning made his debut at the end of April, was picked up by the Los Angeles Dodgers in our fantasy league. Unfortunately, obviously people bid on him, and Dodgers won with a good bid on him. Cal Quantrill, I believe, is owned, but was sent right back down after 2 starts. Didn't look great, has struggled in the minor leagues. And then, like we discussed at the beginning of the show, Corbin Martin made his debut on Mother's Day. Looked pretty good, only went 5 1/3 innings, but we know how the Houston Astros are. They're not going to just pile on innings like the old Cubs did to Kerry Wood and Mark Pryor. They're willing to toss these guys around, give them their chance, give them a shot. And I wonder if we'll see Forrest Whitley at some point, but Corbin Martin looks like he could fill that role that Colin McHugh was supposed to have this year as a starter, but has struggled up until this point. And then one that didn't get discussed much was Nick Senzel, third baseman and outfielder for the Cincinnati Reds and Fantasy Twins, did make his debut on May 3rd and has looked pretty good overall when it comes down to it. Obviously, he's had a much hotter start than Vladimir Guerrero Jr. or Eloy Jimenez. He's looked very, very good up to this point. He's played pretty good defense. All of the questions that have been about him have been whether or not he can stay healthy. He's got 3 home runs already on the season and 7 runs and 7 RBIs and a stolen base. The average isn't there yet, but obviously that fluctuates a ton throughout the season. So that's all we've got for that. Let's get into the Week 6 matchups and just what happened this last week. Part of this is going to be, with this first matchup, we know that the New York Yankees in real life and fantasy have been banged up. They're starting to get healthy at this point, but they have struggled mightily because of health. Guys like Carlos Rodon, Luis Severino being out for a while, Scooter Gennett, Didi Gregorius, Giancarlo Stanton. I mean, Stanton has 8 at-bats on the season. There's not much to say about the New York Yankees in fantasy except for ouch, mostly because their health just isn't there. And it showed this week as they faced the Colorado Rockies and took a beatdown, only winning 1 category out of 12. And that brings them down to a record of 21-50-1, while the Rockies move to 26 games above 500 and continue their impressive streak as they look to repeat and be the first repeat champion of this league. Really breaking it down, the Rockies just had all of the offense this past week, as you can see, with 76 runs scored. Holy shit, boys. I mean, the fact that they nearly doubled what the Yankees were able to put out, even with their injured offense, is insane. The Yankees have not been a bad team, and a lot of it's been fueled by guys like Chris Bryant and Gary Sanchez, Johan Camargo in there. Obviously, some guys that get streaky, but I mean, the Yankees put up a fairly respectable stat line in terms of stats this last week, at least in counting categories, but the Rockies just blew them out of the water. 26 home runs, 76 runs, and 58 runs batted in to go along with 8 stolen bases and a 300 batting average. Absolutely insane. And on top of that, everything clicked on the pitching side of it, as you can see. An ERA under 3, 19 walks allowed, of course, but you're going to get that with 87 strikeouts. The Yankees up there with a 5 ERA. They've struggled mightily this season on the pitching side of it. If they can get healthy, that will be something to help them, but their bread and butter is offense, and they just need to get healthy and be able to bring that average in OPS up, especially with guys like Andujar and Stanton and Gannett. And so, like I said, the New York Yankees, they can thank Chris Bryant for this one. He was the team MVP. After struggling to start the season, he's looked much, much better. And for the New York Yankees, he absolutely crushed it with 9 runs, 8 hits, 4 home runs, and 7 RBIs with an average over 320. Obviously, the average not so much being the big important part here, but 4 home runs accounted for a third of the team's power this week. And just like we talked about George Springer being part of the fire, he was the team MVP for the Colorado Rockies for a big, big reason with his 5 home runs and 10 RBIs with an average over 500 in the week. I mean, you could not get this guy out with an OPS of over 1.7. The fact that he is basically hitting a double every time he was up to bat. So absolutely impressive week by George Springer for the Colorado Rockies. Moving on down to the fantasy Houston Astros, who wish they had George Springer at this point to fuel their offense. They took on a very wobbly and very interesting St. Louis team. They've been up and down, and they've had winning weeks, they've had losing weeks. Not really consistent, but they are still in the thick of it right now. 9 games above 500 after this last week, as they trounced the Houston Astros with the St. Louis Cardinals. Why did I say Arizona Cardinals? Don't know. Getting ready for fantasy football, I guess, is part of it. 11 wins for the St. Louis Cardinals over the Houston Astros, and once again, the Cardinals love getting these ties. I don't know why. They just do. Obviously, Astros have the most ties in the league at 7 right now, so they are up there as well. This brings the Cardinals up to the 38-29-5 mark, like I mentioned, and then the Houston Astros fall to 15 games below 500 with 25 wins on the season. It looks like they're trying to battle the Miami Marlins for that league worst record, but we will get into the Marlins soon. Once again, very excellent week for the Cardinals. Absolutely clicked on offense with everything they have. And that's kind of what they planned on. I did not expect to see their offense has been hot and cold, and a part of it is because of guys like Freddie Freeman and obviously Gleyber Torres. And then you've got some guys, Marcus Semien, Hernan Perez, who can really kind of fill up everywhere, although they can be a little inconsistent. Although I'm surprised to see that Jose Martinez has gotten a lot more play than I thought he would have for the St. Louis Cardinals, but that was a great pickup by Jared in that one. I mean, he's hitting over 330 on the season, driving in runs, not as much power as you'd like to see, but 19 RBIs and 21 runs scored. Excellent counting stats right there. And not only did it click on offense for the Cardinals, but same did the pitching. Surprisingly, that's been one of their more up and down categories this year is on the pitching side with guys like Colin McHugh, Brad Peacock, and Yu Darvish obviously being inconsistent as all get out. But they absolutely dominated the Houston Astros this time. The Astros were just cold everywhere. I mean, their pitching was pretty decent with 72 strikeouts. 36 walks allowed isn't what you like to see, but obviously 6 quality starts they did well with. Very respectable ERA, just under 3.7, and a whip below 1.1. So maybe in a different week, they could have had an ERA around 3.20, 3.10, but just this wasn't their week. It really wouldn't have mattered how much lower it would have gone because the Cardinals had them by a full point of ERA. But they can thank Lucas Giolito for finding his stride. The Houston Astros have to be happy with that deal. With the fact that they're sitting on top of Lucas Giolito, who's looked good this year. If he can stay consistent, that'd be great to add to their pitching because they've had some struggles with it overall. You've got Kyle Wright, who's in the minor leagues once again with a 7 ERA, and he was just optioned recently. You've obviously had Carl Edwards Jr. go up and down between the minors and the majors. And if they can have a guy like Lucas Giolito at age 26 be a big top of their part of their rotation, that's great. And mentioning top of the rotation, we've got St. Louis Cardinals starting pitcher Blake Snell as the team MVP. Excellent week out of Snell. Finally came back healthy, and that's what the St. Louis Cardinals like to see because this past week, where did he go? There he is. He went 11 and 2/3 innings, 2 walks, 21 strikeouts with an ERA close to 1.5. We know what Blake Snell is. We know he can be one of the best pitchers in the game, and absolutely is. And he showed it this past week as he took down the New York Yankees and the Arizona Diamondbacks in this matchup. Looked excellent once again, not surprised with a name like Snell. Moving on to the next one, the Miami Marlins, who begged and begged and begged to be featured on this one. I just couldn't put them first. But here they are in the middle of our review, taking on – it was a battle of the Chris's at this point. You have Chris Barnes and – oh, I feel so bad. I can't remember his last name. The Marlins owner. I know your name is Chris, and I can't remember your last name, and I'm laughing about it. That being said, battle of the Chris's taking place out west. Miami Marlins playing the Road Boys, and unfortunately, they just didn't show up as well as they could have. Although they did avoid the sweep, they avoided the shutout. They were able to get 2 wins, and they were so happy about that yesterday. So props to the Miami Marlins not getting shut out. And this brings them up to 18 wins on the season with 51 losses, while the LA Dodgers have a very good record at 36, 30, and 6 on the season. That Jackie Robinson division is really, really fun right now as all of the top 4 teams are within 13 games of each other at this point. You have the Rockies with 46 wins and the Blue Jays with 33. We will get to them in a few minutes. But obviously, the Dodgers are sitting right in the thick of it with 36 wins and 3rd place in that division and about 6th place overall. Actually, probably 5th at this point, just doing some quick math. So let's move on to this one and see what exactly happened. And not to take anything away from the Dodgers, but the Marlins played a very odd and pretty decent week. You look at what they were able to do. They had 31 runs, not far behind the Dodgers there. Same amount of power. Just behind in RBIs, 1 less per day. Stolen bases right there, and they were able to win batting average and OPS, surprisingly. The Dodgers just did not have a good week in terms of hitting when it came to the ratios. But the Marlins played a very respectable offensive game. Where they struggled was on the pitching side of it. More walks allowed, less quality starts, almost similar numbers of strikeouts, but the real thing that held them back was their inability to keep players off the base paths. With a whip over 1.45, not great there, but they were able to limit the amount of damage that was done, which is good there. And for team MVP of the Miami Marlins, you've got first baseman C.J. Cron of the Minnesota Twins. And I was surprised that name made it. It was an acquisition that they made this offseason, and it seems to be paying off, just the fact that he's a team MVP. This past week, if I can find him real quick, C.J. Cron put up 3 home runs, 6 RBIs to go along with a 370 average and an OPS over 1.1. Absolutely great week out of the corner infielder, where first base has been pretty much a shithole for the last couple of years. It's been a struggle with not many young players being first baseman. Obviously, Cody Bellinger had his struggles last year. But most of your older player or most of your first basemen are older, such as Paul Goldschmidt, Joey Votto being in their 30s already. It's hard to find a young first baseman because most of the time that's where you're going to end up in your late 20s if you're starting to lose the speed and the agility from other positions. But C.J. Cron, excellent week for him. And for the Dodgers, a pretty respectable week on their pitching side of it. Their whip was under 1.3. ERA was a little bit high compared to the rest of the league, but they got the job done and took 9 categories out of 12. Moving on to the last one, this was the Battle of the Commissioners, and not the last one, sorry, 4th one. Really wish Sean was here for this one. It would have been a lot of fun. I miss his smack talk. I'm hoping everything's okay with him, but Battle of the Commissioners came down to it. Very close week overall between these two teams. Atlanta Braves obviously being led by Christian Yelich, Ronald Acuna, some bigger names then.
They don't have the depth, but they have the star power. Unfortunately, that star power did not work like in Super Mario, which would make them invincible, as they dropped 7 categories. They did end up with 1 tie, but the White Sox walk away with 7 wins on the week, bringing them up to a record of 53, 17, and 2, while the Atlanta Braves dig ever closer to that 500 mark as they're hoping to avoid that at this point. Looking at it, very close between these two teams. Runs went to the Braves by 1 single run. In terms of power, these two teams tied with 15. But the White Sox took advantage of the opportunities they were given with 56 runs batted in on the week and 8 stolen bases. So not only were they driving in runs, but they were moving ahead on the base paths as well. And as you can see, the ratio stats were really similar between these two teams. What really made the difference was the White Sox pitching being able to lock it down and have one of their best weeks this year. Triple-digit strikeouts, an ERA close to 3, and 10 saves and holds. Really, the opportunities were there, and their relief pitching not locked it down. On the Braves side of it, they've struggled a little bit. Obviously, less walks allowed, but also less strikeouts, unfortunately. A very good whip with ERA of 3.5 and a whip close to 1.2. So really great week there in terms of limiting base runners. Even though they couldn't get the strikeouts, the ground balls were there and they were effective. And surprisingly, Michael Brantley has been able to stay healthy up until this point in the season, and he is the team MVP for the Atlanta Braves here in week 6. And if we pull up the matchup, you've got as a part of that very, very good Houston offense, he provided 3 home runs, 5 RBIs, and 5 runs scored. Obviously, 5 of those runs being a key to winning one of those categories as well. Same with his batting average over 3 and OPS over 1.0. That helped keep those ratio stats up just enough to win those categories. And of course, Austin Meadows was a big part of the ratios there as well. As for the Chicago White Sox, I wanted to give it to a couple of different offensive guys. It could have gone to Alex Bregman, possibly Cody Bellinger, but just the counting stats weren't there. Josh Bell was definitely up there with his 9 RBIs and 2 home runs, but we'll go with starting pitcher Walker Buehler, who made 2 quality starts and an ERA under 2, 15 strikeouts in 14 innings. Excellent week for him there. Now on to our last matchup as we finally get to it. We had Mac taking on Steve. Mac and his Twins have been looking to stay above the 500 mark, as have the Toronto Blue Jays. They've been up and down all season. It's been tough for both of these teams as they are both in very competitive divisions. The Toronto Blue Jays have struggled mostly just because of cold streaks with guys like Jose Ramirez, and Mookie Betts had a cold start to the year. Same with Jose Abreu, but a lot of those guys have really tidied it up and locked it down recently. And also with Manny Machado struggling as hard as he has in terms of ratios, he hasn't helped much either. But Mookie Betts is finally doing what he's supposed to in terms of power, maybe not so much speed. But when it comes down to it, these two teams played very well. The Blue Jays walk away with the winning week with 7 wins compared to the 5 wins for the Minnesota Twins. So let's break down this matchup after we look at their records. Both of them very close in terms of record. 33 wins for both of them. The Twins with 2 more losses due to the ties. So let's break down this matchup and really see what happened. The Twins had the power is what it was. Twins had the power, but the opportunities for the Toronto Blue Jays were taken advantage of whenever they had it. Obviously, 50 runs, 41 RBIs on the week, and 9 stolen bases as well. But they just couldn't find the power. They couldn't find the on-base ability this week. So counting stats were there for the Toronto Blue Jays, but the ratios and power were there for the Minnesota Twins. And I was surprised to see the Minnesota Twins have such a great week in terms of pitching for them, considering German Marquez was part of the ice side earlier in the show, with him not pitching well over the last couple of weeks. But they were still able to put together a 2.24 ERA, absolutely limiting runs, and a lot of that was due to guys like Jose Alvarado, Luke Weaver being surprisingly effective, obviously Robbie Ray, and then Max Scherzer obviously leading that staff, performing well to his expectations at this point. As for the Toronto Blue Jays, they can thank Jacob deGrom for their week this week. As their team MVP, they've had some pretty good pitching performances this last week, considering how inconsistent they've been. But this one goes to Jacob deGrom, and this should be no surprise to anyone, as if I can find him, there we go. 2 quality starts, ERA under 2, very similar to Blake Snell, very similar to Walker Buehler. Excellent weeks out of these pitchers, and that's why they deserve team MVPs for week 6 here. So that's what we've got for week 6. Great matchups, a little bit lopsided to start the show there, but really tidied down between the last few matchups, and they really were close. Those last 3 matchups, no one really blew each other out of the water. It was a little bit here and there, even though the scoreboard may not say so. So let's get into week 7. We are about a third of the way through the season once we finish this week. So whether you're thinking of buying or selling, now's the time to start moving. It's never too early to buy, never too early to sell. You never know what you can get. Sometimes if you're the first to buy or sell, maybe you make a better deal, and maybe you have to pay a little bit less. Who knows? But I'm excited to see what happens. There's a lot going on. So in this first matchup, we've got the LA Dodgers taking on the New York Yankees, the battle of the bigwigs. You've got 2 big name teams, obviously one West Coast, one being East Coast. So this one's going to determine which coast is better. Is it the West? Is it the East? I'd love to see your guys' opinions, but this one's going to be decided on the field. And I'm going to give it to the LA Dodgers at this point. They've proven that they can hang on with the big boys. They've played very well against the likes of the Rockies and the White Sox. And due to the injuries of the New York Yankees, I think the Dodgers should run away with this one fairly quickly in the week. Moving on to matchup number 2, we've got the Houston Astros taking on the Toronto Blue Jays. The Toronto Blue Jays haven't believed in their pitching as much as they thought they would be able to, but I think they've still got a very good starting staff, as shown by their ERA this last week. Even with a 3.5, you should expect to win most weeks. It's just unfortunate they ran into the Minnesota Twins with a 2.2 ERA last week. I want to root for the Houston Astros. I want to see them perform, but the Toronto Blue Jays just overall have so much talent, so I'm going to go with them this week. They really are better than a 500 team that they've showed at this point. Once it all clicks, they are going to be scary. They are going to be dangerous. And a lot of it comes from the struggles of a guy like Bryce Harper as well. Now that I think about it, I forgot he's on their team. Only hitting .225 on the season with 7 home runs, absolutely taking advantage of the RBIs with 25 on the season, putting him on pace for about 100 on the season. But you need the power, you need the average out of him, and he's absolutely been not worth the $330 million in my estimations, at least. Very hard to watch. But give me the Toronto Blue Jays. I feel like they're just going to click and put up absolutely insane numbers at some point this season. I may be wrong. Now for the Colorado Rockies and the Minnesota Twins, the battle of the mountains. You've got these 2 teams. Obviously, the Twins expect to be better. They've been a little bit busy with life. I've talked to him recently. Even though Mac has been quiet, he is alive. We do not have to worry about him. And even though he has been very active in terms of setting his lineup, I still think the Rockies are the team to beat right now. They've proven that they can handle themselves in big matchups, as they did last year in the championship. They've been able to knock off, or come close to knocking off, the St. Louis Cardinals at least. They've had many winning weeks at this point. So give me the Colorado Rockies. I think they continue their streak at this point and move ever further away from the 500 mark, as they have already shown to do. Moving on, we've got the Atlanta Braves taking on the Miami Marlins. I don't really have a good title for this one. I've been trying to think of it all day, and I really couldn't think of it. So Braves versus the Marlins. Marlins struggling up until this point and have a firm grasp on last place. They say they're going to have a winning week this week. We'll see if that's the truth. I mean, they've only had 1 winning week on the season. Let's see if they can make it 2 this week against a still very tough Atlanta Braves team, even though Ronald Acuna has struggled and Yelich is hurt. I still think the Braves are a much better team than they've showed at this point. And we'll see what happens. But give me the Atlanta Braves over the Miami Marlins. And then finally, we've got the St. Louis Cardinals hosting the Chicago White Sox. The battle of, I don't know, I couldn't think of a good one for this one either. I felt like I should have had something for this. But Chicago versus St. Louis, obviously not as heated of a rivalry as the Cubs in St. Louis. But Jared and I have had some very good matchups in all of their sports. I expect this one to be right up there with him, even though it's regular season. He and I both are very competitive people. I expect Jared to toss out his best and be very active with his team. I don't know what to believe just yet. I'm going to say that the Chicago White Sox win, but it's likely going to be a 7-5 matchup at this point for either way. This one could go one way or the other. The Cardinals being such a Jekyll and Hyde team early this season, we'll see if they lock it down, and I think they can. If everything clicks, they are a very dangerous team, even with lesser-known players on their roster, such as a Hernan Perez or Jose Martinez or Ketel Marte. And Ketel Marte has been absolutely great for him. That was a great pickup for him, especially with second base and shortstop eligibility. But that's what we've got. I think the Cardinals are going to be a team to watch, especially with a very hot Charlie Blackmon at this point in the season. So keep an eye on these matchups. I want to see what you guys think on who will win these matchups this week. That's all I've got for this week. If you guys have any ideas, if you guys want to join in, let me know. Other than that, that's it. I'm excited. Like again, I will remind everyone tomorrow about the NFL roster cuts. Once again, have them in by 10 o'clock Central on May 15th. I will be going through rosters on May 16th. I will also be going through baseball rosters here shortly tonight and letting you guys know if you guys need moves to be made. Like I said, we've got a about 2-day limit for minor leaguers when they get put down to the minor leagues, just to move them onto your, whether you want to move them or drop them, whatever it takes on your team. And like I said, just keep busy with these rosters. You guys have been doing excellent. It's been a fun season so far. And my favorite pickup of the season still has to be the St. Louis Cardinals of Dick Lovelady. Doing pretty good so far in 12 innings pitched, a 3.75 ERA, but still one of my favorite player names. Let's see if we can find a better one this year. Maybe there's a pickup at some point. Maybe there's not, but keep it active, guys, because it's a marathon so far, and this league is so close between everyone. So keep those fantasy lineups rolling, and I will talk to you guys later this week.